He's part of the Bush family political dynasty, and he's carving out his own political road as Texas Land Commissioner. My conversation with George P. Bush starts right now. Welcome to Conversations. I'm Nancy Brinker. My guest today was born into politics. He's the son of a governor and the grandson of a president. He's no slouch himself. He was elected Texas Land Commissioner. It's a pivotal role in the Lone Star State. George P. Bush, thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. Great to be with you, Nancy.
Well, those outside of Texas might not fully appreciate the enormity of your job as a land commissioner. And having lived there several years, I know that, and especially as it relates to the energy industry. Could you briefly explain to our viewers the scope of the position you occupy?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me on. This is a great honor for me. Anytime I have a chance to talk about the oldest state agency in our government, it's always an honor. But consider us the asset manager for the state. We manage 13 million acres, the wealth of which is beneath our feet in the oil and gas resources that we maintain in the Permian and the Delaware Basin. And all the royalties that we generate benefit public schools in Texas. In fact, the endowment that we have built, along with the State Board of Education, now exceeds a market cap of $40 billion, if you can believe that. The agency was created at the dawn of the Texas Republic in 1836 with $1 million. And with those humble beginnings, we've been able to build an incredible legacy for our children and our grandchildren, mainly driven by the oil and gas industry.
And it's wonderful to have you in that position because you are so familiar with the history of Texas. It's such an important state. What are your concerns, though, with the current administration as it relates to energy independence?
Well, the Trump administration was a great ally of ours. Really within a short period of time, we were able to become an energy dependent country to an energy independent one. Largely led by his policies, it put our state in a great position where we had record low unemployment. As we saw with the outbreak of the pandemic, it affected the oil and gas industry. And regretfully, the Biden administration's flurry of executive orders have only made things worse, where our highest unemployment rate now in the state of Texas is in the Permian Basin. So we were prepared. We set up a legal defense task force here in Texas to fight this overreach. Governor Abbott, who was Attorney General during the Obama days, told us exactly what was going to happen. And lo and behold, we've seen more executive orders out of President Biden's office than any other president in modern history. And it's basically sent a chilling effect up and down the spine of those in the industry, one of the largest employers in our state.
What are your feelings on the Keystone Pipeline?
Well, this would have been an incredible artery to transport a much needed commodity from Canada down to the Gulf Coast refineries. This would have lessened our dependence upon foreign sources of oil and refining that product all developed in North America. I also think about the worker on the ground, the blue collar worker that have been laid off because of the cancellation of this project. And studies show that a project of this size would have been safer for the environment than it would be by transporting, for example, by rail car and other means. And so I'm disappointed that the president would overreach with another executive order instead of listening to people in the industry, welcoming into the White House, talking to folks in the industry, but also thinking about the blue collar worker that is now out on the street looking for a job because of the stroke of a pen.
Well, sometimes it's amazing to me how people who are in charge don't ask people who are doing jobs what they think, but everybody has a different style, I guess. Talk to me about your efforts at historic preservation in places like the Alamo.
Well, we preserve basically the state's rich history dating back to 1836, including the day-to-day management on the grounds of the Alamo. This is the most visited site in the entire state of Texas, with over 2.1 million visitors every single year. When I came into office in 2014, A&M conducted a study that showed that the archaeology, that the materials on the church, the iconic facade that your viewers are looking at now, were on the verge of deterioration and wouldn't be around for our children and our grandchildren. So I intervened and asked the legislature for historic appropriation, which we were successful in obtaining. And we've also worked with Phil Collins, the British pop icon, who has the largest Alamo-related collection, to display that on the grounds of the Alamo. So I consider the conservation that we're doing there the most important historical conservation project you'll find in our country.
When you ran as Texas Land Commissioner, you won by a larger margin than any other statewide candidate on the ballot. And obviously, there's some name recognition. But do you think the Latino vote played into that victory too?
Absolutely. And I think the Hispanic vote played a decisive role in helping President Trump get elected. For us Texas Republicans, we're familiar not only in their outreach, but the reach in of Hispanics under the tent. And, what we're seeing in the border in today's day and age, a lot of folks will say, well, this is going to turn off Hispanics, but it's quite the opposite. If you look at the counties that Trump won in the Republican primary of 2016, it was on the border because a lot of second and third generation Hispanics, including myself, know about the legal means, but are frustrated with the illegal manner by which a lot of folks are trying to cut in the line. And it upsets a lot of border communities when you're absorbing all the undue amounts of cost and resources to take on this challenge. So I'm excited because in Texas, we've perfected a model where we're winning majorities in the Hispanic community. And I think it played a big part of helping people like me get elected.
Well, and also immigration is a hot topic right now as well. And when we come back, we're going to talk about that and your memories of your grandfather, President H.W. Bush. Stay with us. Welcome back to Conversations. I'm Nancy Brinker, and I've been talking to Texas Land Commissioner George P. Bush. We've seen a lot of attention to the southern border since the new administration took office. What are your thoughts, Commissioner, on how this is being handled?
Well, I think the Biden administration has dropped the ball. They didn't take the success stories from the Trump administration days, where we had a very clear policy that if you want to apply for asylum to our country, you do so from your country of origin, not be at the hands of Mexican drug cartels that are transporting these migrants to the border to then apply for asylum. Ambassador, I was just down in the Valley earlier this week and then also receive regular security briefings from the Border Patrol station chiefs. And they tell me that the one policy that changed everything was letting go of the Remain in Mexico policy, because now you have the human traffickers that bring folks to the migrants, give them a sense of false hope, get their latches into them, promising these ideas that they're going to have a brighter tomorrow, even though they would be coming illegally. And it's created a burden on our border communities and our Border Patrol officials that are totally overwhelmed. So we need to reform our laws, go back to the Trump days, make it very clear to the cartels that you don't mess with Texas, and that there's a legal way in which people can come to the country instead of abusing the loopholes that we have right now.
Well, is the current migrant situation increasing the level of danger for our Border Patrol agents? That kind of concerns me.
It should. Again, down in McAllen, I had a chance to visit with wives of Border Patrol agents, and they fear for the lives of their loved ones every single day that are watching the border. And because of the unaccompanied child situation as well, almost a majority of them are doing things that they're not trained to do, and that's taking care of children and processing them to see if they're being used by the cartels or if they are legitimately seeking asylum. And so we've got a serious problem in our hands. This whole idea that we needed to fund the police to fund ICE is absolutely asinine. We need to support the people that are keeping that watch, protecting our border, making sure that we can rest quietly at night, but also taking on the incredible surge that's occurring. This is what's going to happen. If you give people a false sense of hope that the borders are open, they're going to try to find any loophole that they possibly can. And so it requires true leadership and a return back to the Trump days.
I've been a very, in all sincerity, a very great supporter of the entire Bush family and have such regard for your deep roots in Texas and understanding. And with your Latino roots, do you think it gives your stance on immigration more credibility across party lines?
Absolutely. I think in Texas, we're common sense. We know how to get things done. And this isn't a political issue. This is a humanitarian crisis that's been politicized by the left. And, it's really a shame that we don't follow the policies that we're working. So following the 19 migrant caravans that we saw on the border, I spent a lot of time visiting with everybody from the Catholic Charities to Border Patrol agents, including ICE as well. And I receive monthly briefings, and they tell us that it's all about messaging in the triangle countries in Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. I think being somebody of Mexican-American heritage whose mother went through the legal process provides some legitimacy. We are a nation of laws and of rules. And look, we're the most compassionate country in the world. You served our country abroad, so you know our compassionate policies, but there's no way that we could absorb every single person that tries to come to our country. And so it's just, it's a fool's errand to let, for political purposes and to try to score points by telling people from other parts that they can escape their terrible situation by traveling on foot thousands of miles, being at the hands of Mexican drug cartels.
And in addition, with all this deep knowledge you have about the state and your background includes military service as well. I know you're a big supporter of our nation's veterans, and I'm curious if your deployment overseas gave you added insight on international relations.
Well, thank you, Ambassador, for recognizing my military service. It was definitely an honor and privilege to wear the uniform. I served for 10 years as a reservist in support of the U.S. Navy in intelligence. I actually served under Admiral McRaven in Afghanistan as part of special operations task forces that pursued some of the most highly valued targets that we had in that ongoing effort. It taught me a lot about ground wars and that they're difficult and hard and complicated, and that U.S. Force should only be used on a reserved basis. Obviously after 9/11, I think that force that was called upon by my uncle, George W. Bush, was justified. But moving forward, we face different types of threats, whether it's cyber, whether it's the rising threats of China. And that's where I'm thankful for President Trump and his new policy of being skeptical of China, our trade agreements with them, and how we can interact with them. And since that time, we've seen a lot of evidence out there, whether it is related to the coronavirus and or cyber attacks that affect our national security. And so, even President Biden is adopting a lot of President Trump's ideas on China. So it's an ongoing challenge that we see. And I'm just thankful that we had a president like Trump achieve so many different settlements in the Middle East that made a lot of progress, moving our embassy to Jerusalem, and so many other alliances that I think are going to stabilize the situation as we withdraw out of Afghanistan.
And are we on target with the opening of that embassy in Jerusalem? Some people have had question about that. And I think a lot of people are very, very also happy about the accords, the business accords that President Trump was able to establish.
Yeah, I've never thought in my wildest dreams that we would see recognition of Israel by several of the GCC countries, in addition to other peace-loving nations in the Middle East. And so I think the Trump administration doesn't get enough credit for that, including business and commercial connections that are so vital to the growth in the Middle East and providing economic opportunities for folks so that they feel a sense of freedom and a taste of what capitalism is about.
When we come back, we're going to be talking about education and George P. Bush's memories of his grandfather, President George H.W. Bush, and maybe some things about George W. Bush. I'll be right back. Welcome back to Conversations, where I'm continuing to talk with Texas Land Commissioner George P. Bush. You spent a little time as a high school teacher, too. So I wanted to get your thoughts on education. It's been so important in all of your family, and closing the achievement gap in places like inner city schools.
Well, as I was graduating from college, I was inspired by Teach for America, an incredible program, and worked in South Florida and an impoverished school district, and learned a lot about our public school systems as a dropout prevention teacher, teaching U.S. history and trying to make that relevant in the lives of kids who faced very difficult situations. And from that experience, I really became a pro school choice advocate here in Texas, and joined the board of Uplift Education, where I believe over 90% of the student population is at the poverty rate, but yet 100% of their students go on to graduate from high school, many of whom are the first to apply, let alone go to college. And so, I think that in our great country, we have so much more that we can do in terms of opening the aperture for kids to get a better education, but also to emphasize that there's options outside of just going to college. Speaking of
Mhm.
the energy industry, there are tremendous needs for six-figure job placements now for kids if they can learn how to be a pipe welder or a plumber, where we have tremendous shortages not only in the energy industry but in construction.
Your father, Jeb Bush, Governor Jeb Bush, has been a great leader in education, and your grandfather, President George H.W. Bush, and President George W. Bush, were respected on both sides of the aisle, the political aisle. A lot of people miss George H.W. Bush. We know the public persona of a person like this is amazing, but are there some fond memories of him that you can share with us?
Absolutely. My grandfather was just an incredible man, humble as it could be. You would never know that he was in elective service. Taught me looking at those baseballs behind me, he taught me how to throw baseballs, to cast a fishing rod. And we'd always find time together. And that's what I found just amazing about him, is that he had the role of a lifetime as president of the United States and helping to end the Cold War with Ronald Reagan, but always found time for his children and his grandchildren to read a book, to go outside and throw the baseball, and just to be a regular granddad. And I just, when he passed on and I was honored to speak and deliver a eulogy in Houston at his local church, that's what I shared, is that people know him as president, but I knew him simply as Gampy, as my granddad, and just a touching man with an incredible heart.
Well, I get very almost tearful when I talk about your family, because it's been such a dynasty and so amazing in your values. Do you remain close with your uncle, George W. Bush, the other President Bush?
Absolutely. I call on him a lot. Since he's up in Dallas, I'm here in Austin at the Capitol. We're busy with legislative session, but I'll definitely call on his advice, and just an incredible leader in his own right. And a lot of the lessons that he shared, I think, can be valuable for really anybody who thinks about public service. I mean, he just loves the fight of it and the important values that are at stake in our country. So definitely call upon his advice. He's the man, and I hope to see him for the Rangers game opening day coming up.
That'll be a big day. You hold a pretty prestigious position as Texas Land Commissioner right now, but are there rumors, that you may be looking at a run perhaps for Attorney General or Lieutenant Governor of Texas? Where are you in that decision process right now?
Well, right now I'm focused on the legislative session. We wrap up in June, but supporters have reached out to me and have said to take a deeper look at higher office. I think here in Texas, for example, we have a high-ranking official that has been accused of everything from corruption to bribery. And those charges need to be taken and looking at very seriously by federal authorities, which they are doing right now. But in the meantime, if Texas is to remain Republican, and for this important position is to remain in a conservative place, we need to examine very closely who we put on the football field and making sure that we have the right team on that field heading into November of 22.
So in addition to your career, and it is wide and big, your wife, Amanda, who I got to talk to a few months ago, also has a very serious career, and you have two boys. How are you all managing to juggle all of this?
Well, needless to say, Ambassador, we don't have a social life. It's pretty much work and the kids, to be honest with you. Right after a long day of work, and we're constantly tethered to our phones like everybody else, we just make sure to prioritize our kids and making sure that they have it as normal of an upbringing as possible. And just being hungry and humble. I think that's what it's frankly all about. And I've told my wife that I'm married to you. I'm not married to politics. If it ever gets in the way of what's important in life, which is being a good dad and a good husband, then maybe we need to reconsider things.
Well, you certainly are all those things. And one quick question, are we as Republicans doing enough to engage new and diverse voters?
I think Trump did a great job of doing exactly that. Here in Texas, going back to McAllen and Hidalgo County in our conversation earlier on immigration, he almost carried Hidalgo County. That's the first presidential Republican candidate to come close to doing that. He carried Zapata County, right there on the border, natural gas basin, the Eagle Ford Shale. So all to say that we did a fantastic job on election night among Hispanic Republicans, and really proud to build upon his legacy in that effort. We could probably do a better job among millennials and suburban women. I think if we emphasize the left's new defund the police movement, we're going to do really well among those groups. If we talk about economic opportunity and the Texas business model that we have, we'll do really well among millennials because they know that Washington, D.C. is saddling them with incredible amounts of debt. And so I'm excited about making that pitch to new groups. And I'm, as the only Latino now serving statewide military veteran, I think I'm pretty unique in sharing that message and that vision for our state.
Well, I think you have a great future, and unfortunately, that's all the time we have for our show today. I'd love to talk to you for a long time. Commissioner Bush, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, tune in next week for another episode of Conversations. So long.